Okay, we will bring to order the special meeting of the City Council of Nisswa for Thursday, April 15th. Thank you all for coming. The reason for the meeting tonight is the 2021 compensation study, the results that we received from Ann, I'm not going to attempt the last name, from Baker Tilly. First item, memo from Jenny that she sent out. Do you want to go over that, Jenny, or what do?
No, good evening, City Council. I think if you want to start off with Ann and her presentation.
That works.
So we will turn it over to Ann, and I will put her PowerPoint up here. And we've got it up on the screen, Ann, so if you just want to go through the slides, I will forward them when each one when you're ready.
Okay, sounds good. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Thanks for inviting me to this presentation this evening to talk about the compensation study that Baker Tilly has conducted for the City of Nisswa. Most of the things in this presentation are also in the report that has been shared with you as well. So this will be a pretty brief presentation. At any time, feel free to ask any questions that you might have about any of the components for this. So Jenny, if you want to flip ahead to the objectives slide.
Yep.
Okay, great. So the objectives that were identified by the city for doing this study, we did a comprehensive study for the city back in 2016. And that was a full scope study where we reviewed job descriptions. We developed a new job evaluation system to review internal equity of all positions within the city. We conducted a very comprehensive wage and benefit survey at that time to determine where the city was relative to market, and then used that internal relationships and the market data and developed new compensation plans for the city at that time, and then also developed implementation options. So what impact the study recommendations would have on individual employees. So it's been a period of time since that last study was conducted. Industry standards call for comprehensive studies about every 5 to 7 years. So you're right at that 5-year mark. And over the last several years, the market has been rapidly changing. So it really is a good time to, take a look at where your salaries were. So what the city identified was doing a review and evaluation of the current classification and compensation system. And a goal of that was to determine what is the current relationship of the city's wage ranges to the market. Over the last several years, the city has been updating your compensation structure. You have been making adjustments for employee wages within that structure, but were they keeping up with your market comparables that were identified in the last study? And then looking at evaluating internal rankings of positions as necessary. So if we were to identify any positions that needed review, as far as any changes that had occurred since the last time the position was looked at, whether there were any red flags as to where the position lined up relative to market, did we need to look at review? And we really, only had a couple of positions that really have undergone changes, and some underwent changes while we were going through the process of the study. And those changes are reflected in an updated evaluation. And then looking at updating the compensation system and strategy for the city. We have not completed that process yet because we want to get some direction and some thoughts from the city council as to how you would like to use the information we're bringing to you this evening for making any adjustments to the compensation program for the city. And then based on that feedback, if there are changes that are made to that compensation system, we will then also develop those implementation options and strategies for making any of those changes. So next slide, please, Jenny.
Okay.
So the methodology that we used for this study, I had some conversations with your city administrator to talk about some of the issues and concerns that the city had for moving forward with this study. We had discussions about the survey group and should we keep the same group of organizations that was included in the last study, or did we look at making any changes? So just some of that background information as we forged ahead with collecting information. We then obtained market salary information, which we're bringing to you for review this evening. And then, of course, the next steps then would be updating the compensation plan if necessary based on the feedback from the members of the city council, reviewing then assignment of positions within that compensation plan. So do any of those positions need to move from where they are currently assigned based on changes in positions, based on current market conditions for those positions? And then again, that development of implementation options if necessary. Next slide, please, Jenny.
Okay.
So on this next slide, and these are also included in the study summary that you have been provided. And with conversations with Jenny, we determined that we would use the same cities that were used during the last study because that was something that had been accepted by the city council at that time as organizations that were deemed comparable to the city of Nisswa. And when we look at organizations that are comparable, we use several different factors to make those determinations. And those factors include size of the organization, and not just population, but service area. It looks at geographic location, so who are your neighbors? It looks at organizational structure, so who is providing the same level and types of services that you are. We look at demographic information, such as, the city of Nisswa, in the summer you get a large influx of tourists that come through your city. And so that makes you a little bit unique in comparison to other cities. And then also competition for employees. So there were a lot of different factors that went into selection of these organizations. We were able to obtain information from the majority of these cities, which is great. But when we look at the market survey data, you'll see that we don't have that large a number of responses for every position because not every position will be a direct match in the other organizations. Plus you have liquor operations and a bar restaurant, and that's something that is fairly unique that we don't find in a lot of other organizations. So they will have fewer responses for those types of positions. Next slide, please, Jenny.
Okay.
All right, in our salary survey, and there's summary of this information in the study summary that I've provided you. And then I know in your packet, city administrator has provided some variations of the comparisons based on the different groups of positions that you have within the city. But in that salary survey, we included 24 positions. So we started out with all positions to see what kind of information we could collect on those positions. In the final analysis, we used 16. We eliminated some of those from the analysis just because of lack of responses. So for some of those positions, we didn't get any information or 1 or 2 responses. And we made a determination that anything with less than 7 responses, we weren't going to use because it wasn't enough information to draw conclusions about the market rate for that position. So when we looked at the wages, what we compared is salary ranges. So we looked at your starting pay, your mid pay, and the top pay that was available for each position. And when we looked at those, on average, your salary ranges are below market. So when we included those 16 positions, your starting salaries are just over 6% below market, and your midpoint and maximum salaries are just under 7% below market. And that's on average. You do have some positions that are more consistent and comparable to market, and others that are further away from market. And then we did a look at, comparing those wages, excluding the police officer and the sergeant position, because those are 2 positions that are fairly significantly below market averages. So we wanted to see, what impact that had on the overall picture of the rest of the positions. And so, these are a little bit closer to the market. So excluding those 2 positions, your minimum salaries are a little under 5% below market, midpoint salaries just under 6%, and your maximum salaries are 6% below average. And again, that complete data is in your packet. It's also in Appendix 1 of the summary report. So next slide, please.
Okay.
And then this is just a refresher. As a part of the compensation plan, we use job evaluation to determine, along with market, as to where positions fit within the compensation structure that you currently have in existence, and any modifications to that we may move forward with. Job evaluation, just as a refresher, or for those of you who weren't on the city council when we did the last study, job evaluation is a requirement of the state of Minnesota under their Local Government Pay Equity Act, but is also a very common compensation practice in both public and private sector industries worldwide. And it's the tool that organizations use to make sure that positions are lined up appropriately with other positions within the organization, so that you have equitable compensation amongst positions that have similar levels of job responsibilities, similar levels of job requirements. So what we used was the SAFE job evaluation system, which is a very comprehensive job evaluation system. There are 9 job factors that go into that evaluation system, which gives us the ability to compare seemingly very different jobs to one another within the organization. So it allows us to evaluate, a liquor store clerk, to a bartender, to a police officer, to somebody in planning, to your city administrator. So it gives us that ability. And so it's a very comprehensive system. And I can go into more detail of that if you would like when we go over the report. Next slide. So pay philosophy, and we discussed this back in the 2016 study of pay philosophy for the city of Nisswa. And what the goal was to provide fair and equitable compensation to all positions and employees within the city. across all of the different service areas which the city provides, balancing the external market with internal equity, so making sure that we were establishing a competitive compensation program, but also making sure that positions were consistent with one another within the organization. Having a competitive pay structure, but also taking into consideration what the city has available for financial resources, not only for implementing a system, but also for sustaining and maintaining that system moving forward. And then making sure it's understandable for all stakeholders, employees, supervisors, administrators, the elected officials, and also the citizens of the city as well. Next slide, please.
Okay.
So as far as recommendations, we don't have specific recommendations for the council tonight. We want to get some direction and feel for how the city council would like to move forward with this information. But what we would recommend is considering adjustments to your overall pay plan so it is more competitive and consistent with the organizations that have been selected by the city as your market comparison group based on the factors that I discussed a little bit earlier. And then also consider maybe some additional adjustments or splitting out the police officer and police sergeant positions based on the large difference that there is between their current salary ranges and the market data. And you'll see that in the survey summary that we have provided to you. So next slide. And then system administration. And the city has been doing this, but just to kind of reiterate, moving forward based on the recommendations and the decisions that the city council makes for moving forward, just making sure that there's ongoing support for administration of the system moving forward to assist you in maintaining that relationship to market, assist you in maintaining internal equity for all positions. So that looks at base adjustments, adjusting pay ranges, adjusting the wages for individual employees. And then we always throw in, you know, making sure that there's a performance component for employee movement within the range. So moving from step to step based on satisfactory performance. And then next slide. So looking at the goal of this project and of the city's compensation program that was established back in 2016 of providing fair and equitable compensation to employees. And it is a very competitive these days and changing labor market, especially in certain areas. Public safety, technical positions, you know, we're finding basically across the board in public sector organizations, it's getting more and more difficult to recruit employees into those types of positions. There's fewer qualified workers going into some of those areas that we find in local government. And again, internal equity and market competitiveness, being fiscally responsible with public resources, because we all know that it's the taxpayers that provide the funding to pay city salaries for the services that they are provided by the city of Nisswa. And then consistent administration of pay policies and procedures across all city departments. And at that, we can open it up for questions or jump into the report and look at some of the specific survey information, however you would like to proceed.
Does anyone have a question for Ann at this time?
Yeah.
Don, go ahead.
And just a general question. About 5 years ago, we did a very thorough study, as you have noted. And we made corrections at that point of in the neighborhood of about $50,000 in round numbers. Since that time, we've had people go through different steps. We've had cost of living increases and et cetera over the last 5 years. Now we do the study, it's just come out, and we find instead of 50,000 behind, we're over 100,000 behind. What are we doing wrong?
Well, it's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's just that the market has been changing that rapidly over the last few years, just because of the difficulty of being able to hire and retain employees, especially in certain types of positions. That it's just kind of that snowball effect of, you know, this organization has trouble, so they increase their wages. And then the neighbor then says, well, you're stealing my employees, so now I need to increase my wage schedule. And it filters kind of through the area. And it's not just you that, you know, there's all sorts of organizations that they've adopted pay plans. They have been maintaining those pay plans, and they're still finding that they're falling behind market. They're having difficulty recruiting qualified employees in positions. And it's, you know, it's difficulty recruiting, it's the current market, and it is the lack of available workers in a lot of areas in public sector.
And does it include, do you include like insurance and that sort of compensation in the study?
We did not do a total compensation review.
And do most of the cities, do the supervisors, are they salaried or hourly?
I would have to go back to the specific data, but most supervisors, if they're
Like
true
department
supervisors,
Sorry.
department heads, most of those are salaried employees.
Okay, so we're comparing against salaried employees.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
For the most part, and it can vary. There are some organizations that are smaller in size that even though those employees qualify as being salaried, they will still provide them overtime, just to ensure that the employees that they supervise are not making more than the supervisors are.
And if I can, I'm just going to piggyback off Don's question because he stole mine. But this might be for the next part of the study. If so, just let me know. But we adjusted, like Don said, for cost of living every year. And we're farther behind. We wanted to stay in the middle of the steps, or not the steps, but the pay ranges. We wanted to, we shot for staying in the middle. That's what we took on the last time. We had a low option, a middle option, and a high option. We took the middle option. How do we keep track of the market then is it something we have to do yearly then? Because, or do you just have to go cost of living plus a little more, or?
Well, there are a lot of organizations that do a check-in annually, and what that check-in usually entails is you've established your market group, and so what it entails is reaching out to those and just saying, okay, for 2022, what adjustments are you making to your pay scale, and what adjustments are you making to individual employees? So then you can look at what those organizations are doing, and you can say, well, we were planning on 2%, but it looks like our survey group is going 2.5%. Then you get that idea of, okay, we should be doing 2.5%. Is it within our financial resources to do the 2.5%? If not, how close can we get to that so you don't keep falling behind market? So that's a way to kind of keep in touch with what is going on. So you're not going, you know, way above, and you're not lagging behind.
Yeah, I was wondering about the data. When you ask for salary, are we asking where do you get that data from? Are you asking the people directly, or is there like a general information?
It's a combination of factors of getting it in general, and also using information from the League of Minnesota Cities survey.
Okay.
So some of the organizations are very good about keeping that data up to date. Some of them don't respond to it at all. So we, made contacts for pay plans from other organizations. We used league data when it was available, so we aren't pestering organizations if we don't need to. So it's a variety of factors with which we get the information.
So when you say city administrator, for example, are the job descriptions from one city administrator to another city administrator the same or different, or are they unified basically?
They're fairly consistent. There's going to be a little bit of difference because every community is unique, but most city administrator positions are going to be fairly consistent.
Is that because of the League of Minnesota Cities? They help to define what a city administrator is, or is that every city does their own?
The league doesn't, but there is, legislation that talks about, if you're this type of city, you have these responsibilities, and if you're this type of city, you have these. But the league does provide assistance, and they do show, kind of what is a summary of a city administrator, for example.
Okay. And I noticed in one other thing in the survey results that you gave, you mentioned in there for comparison purposes that industry standards say that a relationship to the market is within plus or minus 5%. If it's within that range, then it's basically comparable to the market?
It's industry standards say plus or minus 5% is considered comparable to the market unless an organization deems a different type of relationship. For example, I've worked for communities before where based on what their market group is, for example, a small city on the fringe of the Twin Cities metro area, which might be next door to a Lakeville or an Eagan or those types of things. Their market is a little bit different just because of where that is. So they may say that because this is our market area, we're going to be at 90% of market. Because obviously we can't pay what a Lakeville or an Eagan is compensating their employees. I've had other organizations, and this is a metro community, that because their philosophy is we want to be able to hire and retain the best of the best, that their pay philosophy is to be at the 75th percentile of the market. So they want to be significantly above. So the 5% is a guideline for your comparison. Most organizations that we do work for want to be pretty close to average if their market group is a group that's fairly consistent with their community.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned, I believe that you're just comparing salaries in the study?
We did in this study, we just did salaries.
Okay. If
We
you
did a
include-
very comprehensive review of fringe benefits when we did the last study. So we just looked at doing, just comparing the wages because we did that comprehensive review, within the last 5 years, and benefits they don't change greatly from year to year.
So that was going to be my point, that you're just with salary, it doesn't include benefits, which can be another, 25% of the salary?
It can be, but in most public sector organizations, benefits, when we do that in-depth review, there's not a great discrepancy between the benefits as a whole between communities. You might find, this organization gives a little bit more vacation. This one gives a different holiday. This one might pick up a little bit bigger percentage of insurance. However, insurance has gotten extremely difficult to compare just because there are so many different plans and options that are out there. But there's not a huge difference in public sector across different cities for benefits that are offered.
One question I had, and then I'll let you get on with what you're doing. When you mentioned the thing, the one part about in your presentation about performance, and I noticed in the reading this, there was some mentions about performance at different places. Mainly, it would have been in the compensation philosophy portion of your, is that pay for performance or is that different than performance?
That is different than performance. Pay for performance is usually a separate type of payment that is either outside of the regular pay plan, or it's an organization that designs an open range system rather than a step system. And so employees can get different types of increases based on their level of performance. In performance in this aspect is really looking at, okay, for employees to move through the pay range from step to step, they should be performing at a satisfactory increase, a satisfactory level to receive a step increase within the organization.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have no more questions. Does anyone else have a question?
I'm just wondering, we've had some employees over the past several years leave. I just wonder how many of those that did leave, was it because of better salary someplace else or other reasons? Practically, how many have we lost because of salary? Any idea?
That's hard to say.
I also wonder if we've ever done exit interviews. Of course, the employee has to agree to want to do an exit interview, but
We started doing that over the past couple years.
okay, of the ones that have exited, has it been pay?
Not off the top of my head, but I'd have to go back and look.
Okay.
I think it's just, it's opportunity, whatever they might have had, which is obviously then pay is a part of that.
Correct.
But it's not just the only, it's the professional growth, professional growth, opportunity, that kind of thing.
And I know we've lost one employee because of personal stuff. He just worked better for him to be elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So that was fine. Can't do anything about that.
Did you want Ann to?
Yeah, it's not always about the level of pay. Typically when you're looking at your pay plan, it's something that you want to design that gives you a starting wage that allows you to recruit employees as they have vacancies, and then a top pay that is, competitive within your area. But there's all sorts of reasons that employees leave.
I'm sure Ann could, walk us through any of the spreadsheets if you have specific questions. It seems like the council has a general feel for the information that was provided. I'll just note that I provided you some other options as far as looking at the data from different perspectives. As we have enterprise funds, potentially you'd want to look at those separately from the general fund. As she mentioned, we pulled out the Teamsters group look at that separately. So I believe there are 6 options. Certainly there's other ways to look at it as well. But I provided that just for your information and kind of seeing things from a few different perspectives. I also asked Ann a question that might be helpful as far as consistency at the different levels, as far as we're consistent, at least in where we've landed with respect to market, which I think in a way is positive, whereas you could see potentially where maybe our low salaries are really out of whack differently than our high salaries. And then you have kind of another layer of issues, I'll say, where our starting salaries could, what if those were 10% above market, but then you get to the high point and we're 6% below. So you'd have to make other adjustments there as well. So it seemed like when I saw that, I said, well, that's a positive that we're consistent in that way, so that we're not looking at, I think, structurally major changes. It's just how do we adjust the number itself. Does that make sense? Hopefully I explained that well enough. But that was something I
Yes.
picked up on.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that you're exactly right. It's consistent, because sometimes we'll go into organizations and we do find that, maybe their starting salaries are significantly below and their top salaries are more competitive, and vice versa. But you're just consistent across your pay plan. So rather than, looking at restructuring the pay plan, it really is a matter of, do you want to make any adjustments to be closer to the market? And then it's just an all across the board adjustment. The only exception is, and we're seeing this all across the country, is the public safety positions. Just because it has gotten increasingly difficult to find qualified employees to fill those positions. And there are organizations, that will steal any good employee that they can from their next door neighbor, just to fill a vacancy if it's a good employee. So that's not anything that was a surprise to me as we looked at this, because I see it in every state where I do these studies.
So what that's essentially saying is our pay plan is working the way we have it set up. It's just adjusting to market, essentially.
Correct.
Yeah, because when I started looking at public safety, that was the biggest area that jumped out to me. And I don't want to lose the officers that we have. They're doing a good job in my opinion, and I would hate to see them go. I'm not saying they would, but that was the biggest concern for me after looking at everything.
Yeah, and it's not that unusual to have those public safety positions sometimes pulled out into a separate pay plan, just because their structures are sometimes different and where they align with market is sometimes different. So it's not that unusual to do that.
Right, but I mean, if I look at Nisswa, in the wintertime, you're dealing with 2,000 residents. But then in the peak season, you're dealing with large city populations. And I mean, yeah, that was just my big concern at that one. So,
Yep.
I mean, because you have
exactly.
to have, because public safety, they have to know how to react to that 2,000 population, and then all of a sudden, boom, here you go with, a large city population. So.
Yeah, and that makes Nisswa, fairly unique. There are other organizations, there are other cities that are similarly situated, but there's many of them that don't have to deal with that issue. It's pretty consistent year round as to the issues that they deal with. And it's not just it's not just your public safety. You know, you think about what happens in your bar, in your liquor store, and
Correct.
in other areas as well.
Correct.
So Ann, if I'm, taking what I've read in the memos and things that we got from you. So I'm just going to pull one out, and it's a position that's 9.72% under. There's another one that's 20% and another 979, for example. 5% plus or minus is considered okay, for lack of a better word. 5% of my comparables, if I'm within 5%, I'm within the ballpark of where I should be. So I'm going to fix this. So let's say that, okay, I just bring them up to that 5 or say 4%, within 4%. Is that a mistake on our part to do that? To just bring everybody close to the 5%, say? What mistake am I making, and what am I setting myself up for? Are we going to be right back here again next year type thing?
You could be, just because it brings it just to the 5%, and you're going to have some organizations that are going to say, we want to be at average.
Okay.
For example, I did this similar project for another city last fall, and they were looking at implementing on the first of the year, and they were about the same relationship that you are to market. And what they did is they adjusted their pay scale by 4% for a market adjustment, and then they adjusted it another 2.5% for a cost of living adjustment. So for 2021, they did a 6.5% adjustment in their pay plan to get them closer to market. So that was going to bring them on average about 1.5%, within about 1.5% of market average.
And they did that across the board?
They did. You know, the one thing in Minnesota with pay equity, to say for this position, I'm going to adjust it 4%, and for this position, I'm going to adjust it 6%, and for this position, I'm going to adjust it 2%. Then you face the very real probability that you will not maintain compliance with pay equity. And then if you are out of compliance with pay equity, then you need to make adjustments to get into compliance. And if you don't make those adjustments, then you face fines from the state. I just on Monday night, I just met with another city's city council to propose an update to their pay plan. We had developed a pay plan for them back in 2017, and the city council chose to not follow it in its entirety and made adjustments based on, performance of employees and based on perceived market for certain positions. And they were found out of compliance by the state. And so now they're having to, make adjustments and increases to employee wages and revamp the pay plan so that they can achieve compliance with pay equity. So especially for a city of your size, I would strongly recommend that you don't do it position by position adjustment. Otherwise, we'll be back here again next time you have to file a pay equity report.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I noticed that the data that we used here, you have in here, you did a market survey update to the winter of 2021. It's actually 2020, right? So that
No, 2021.
in the winter of 2021.
Yeah, we collected the data this winter.
Yeah, we started after the new council, right? So it was 21.
January,
Yes.
February, winter.
Yeah, oh, January, okay, I see.
Yep.
So then the data that is actually used, does that include the cost of living increase that in our data that we gave?
Yes,
Our
it
current
includes your
salaries, yes.
2021
Current
data.
salary, the cost increase is included?
Yep. Mhm.
Okay, and all the data that we got from the league, the Minnesota City League, was also 221 or with the increase already?
Some of it was 2021, some of it was 2020, but we aged that data.
Okay,
So we're in compliance as we sit now. Or not,
Yes,
so
Yes, what?
we're in compliance. I mean, we're in compliance now.
yes.
If we choose
You would be in
to-
compliance with pay equity based on your last pay equity report, yes.
So if we chose not to do anything and the market continues, that's where then we'll fall out of compliance? I know maybe. I'm not asking that
Compliance
right, but-
compliance has nothing to do with
No.
market. Compliance is just
It's
looking
just-
at internal equity.
The equity, okay. Okay,
Yes,
that's-
looking at
yep, no,
internal
that-
equity. So,
So.
Yeah.
Yep, no, that
It's when you
answers
start-
that question.
It's, yeah.
I just got confused on the two for a second.
Jennifer, what do you need from us?
Well,
What are you looking for?
does the council have any more questions first? Or we don't know yet?
No.
Do we want to open it up to employees? So we, at this point, Ann, we wanted to open it up to staff that's here to ask questions.
okay, Okay.
So if there's any staff that has a question, please come on up and ask, you can ask Ann directly, or any of, you can ask me, but pass it on to Jenny and Ann anyway, so. So if there's anyone that has a question they want to ask about the study or what they have or anything at this point? Nobody? Okay. Okay. Do you have anything you wanted to go, Jenny?
I don't have anything additional as far as information. I think now we're at that point of discussion where we want to try to make a plan for how we will work through making decisions, getting more feedback, any of those things. So that's kind of where I think we're at.
Well, I mean, here's the thing is, there's hiring employees and training them is expensive. And it takes time, okay? And preferably, you want to keep your employees. And what we've been doing the last few years, it seems like, is every time we have a good employee that's going to leave, we have to either quickly figure out how we're going to keep that person here, and we're scramble at the last minute thing versus, and that may be inevitable. That might be something we end up having to do depending what the position is. I don't know. But it seems to me that, we wanted to stay in the middle of, and again, we're in compliance, but we want to stay in the middle. And some of the neighbors, if you will, are spending more money on certain areas than we are. And so, poof, there goes your employee that you just got done training in. I do know that some of the employees have said, they don't want to leave. I know some have said that they want to stay here because they like the area. They like being here, let's face it. It's better than the alternatives in some areas at this point. But you got to be able to live here too. So, we wanted to stay in the middle. And Ross and Don, you were there, so correct me if I'm wrong with that, but our goal was to kind of stay in the middle of the pay scale, so we're always in compliance. But being in compliance doesn't seem to be our problem. And it seems that it's just our neighbor, is that a fair thing to say? Our neighbors are just outspending us?
that would be correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
But we still want to stay but we don't want to fall out of compliance and have to play catch up with the neighbor all in the same year. So, you know, I mean, one suggestion I would have is, you know, that maybe we move from here to the personnel committee, and the personnel committee could schedule times, or we could have workshops with the employees and figure out what the employees really want to have. Is it money? Is it benefits? Is it, you know, I mean, how can we, you know, within our financial means, how can we do things and take suggestions from the employees as well? I mean, we can put all our heads together and figure out where we want to go. It would be easier on a personnel committee level only because there's 2 council members there, so we don't have to worry about quorum issues. And we can arrange things so it's more convenient for employees. And if somebody else wants to sit in on those meetings, it doesn't necessarily have to be myself. If they want to take my place on the personnel committee at a meeting because they have questions, whatever. But we could set some workshops up with employees that would meet employee schedules. So like you know, some evenings, afternoons, whichever works the best. That's just one suggestion I had. I don't know how y'all feel about that.
Yeah, I'd rather see that instead of saying, okay, we'll go to this percentage and then in 5 years, we're back to where we
Right.
again.
Well, and we can direct those questions. Jenny and Ann can sit down and look at them. And if it's like everything else that I used to do with the Public Works Committee, they can explain why my opinion or my idea is wrong.
I think what we need to do is reaffirm that we want to stay roughly in the middle. And basically from that point, take all your questions, however you want to, but that's the goal.
Yeah.
I kind of agree. I think with what you're saying is that I think we need to have, as a council, a general direction and then see where that goes. And I'm, you know, as I sit here tonight, I just got too many questions spinning in my head to, you know, I just sometimes need time to process things because it's a big decision. It's a big decision for our employees, which obviously we want to retain, but it's also, you know, a big decision for our job is, you know, to be fiscally responsible.
Right. But there's a difference between staying in the middle, as we said, to use that, to stay in the middle so that we're in compliance with the state is with comp worth, comparable worth. That's different than staying in the middle with our comparable cities.
I understand.
And I don't think that's what they're meaning.
But as far as staying with compliance with the state, we are in compliance with the state.
Correct.
Yeah.
So what we're really talking
Correct.
is being competitive with our neighbors and being competitive in the market.
And staying there.
And it appears that, if I understand this, the way that we're set up, our system will continue probably for the most part to stay in compliance,
But not
competitive.
but not competitive.
Right.
So, because that's why I kind of asked it to clear in my mind, because I keep going back to really compliance, we're fine.
Well, if the 5% is one of the goals, you can narrow that down to just make it 3% or 2.5% instead of 5.
True, but you can also, with employee input, let's just say your employees are saying, well, you know, maybe it's, you know, can we get a little, can we bump up or work on this benefit or that benefit? And because of that, you know, I mean, that's a question for them. And they need to, you know, as a group, I would encourage them to get together, discuss it. What are you thinking? Put it all down and meet with that's why I say, you know, meet with Jenny and personnel, and then we can throw those questions at Ann, and then she can do her magic and then come back with a plan that'll work for us, and it'll be good forever and ever.
And do cities ever look at their local area and wages and economics within their local area, or is it, we're always just strictly looking at other governmental cities?
They do look within their area. The problem is that there's a lot of positions in local government that don't have comparisons in the private sector. You would have some, you would have, your bartenders, liquor store clerk, somewhat your administrative support and your maintenance, but public safety, city administrators, it's pretty tough because of the wide range of things that they deal with. Whereas most private sector, it's a single category of things, services that they're providing. So they do, but it's usually a component of a larger study, just because they're not going to find many positions where you're going to find a direct match.
Harry, you had a question? Can I make a comment? Yeah, come on up. So we can.
Mr. Mayor, you just said that maybe meeting with employees, ask them what they wanted to do. It's great that you want employee input, but you didn't do a benefit study. So therefore, this is a pay discussion and asking employees whether they want more pay versus better benefit. This doesn't change the pay issue.
No, it doesn't.
So you're going to get, let's just say there's 10 employees here. So you're going to get 10 different answers on that. One, you're not going to be able to come to consensus. So you need to take the benefit part out of it since you didn't do the study. So you're just down to the pay issue. And I think, this is just my thought, haven't asked anyone else, the right road to go down would be the personnel committee part of the pay discussion, and then back amongst the council, and then make your decision to bring it to the employees to get our feedback or whatever you decide that way.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
But I think in general, we're all in agreement that we want to be in the middle. And not only just for being compliance, but also for the market. Want to be in the middle of the market.
Yep.
That's the way I would be thinking as well.
So when Jenny starts to look at the budget for next year, that's kind of the direction we should point her to.
Right.
Yes, I agree. I think so.
No, I think that's great feedback. And I would just certainly say, depending on if there's any formal conversations that we have with staff or not, I mean, you can always provide feedback anytime. So as we go through this, we'll start to incorporate that direction into our budget. And as we do that, in the next couple of months, we'll be starting our budget process. So we'll have time then to see how that impacts with everything else. And we have the council goals initiative we're working on too. So that's a part of all of those things. I think it will bring everything together. So I can definitely do that, work with the personnel committee and if we have questions. And, again, we'll just say that it's open if there's ever questions or we need to talk about something more specifically.
Because that's, we do need to see how that impacts the budget.
Yep.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I wonder if the Personnel Committee can also address the concept of doing an update study rather than waiting 5 years, doing it every 2 years, come back with a recommendation to the rest of us or something like that. So we can keep
Yeah,
fingers on it a little better.
We should look at that.
So you're not making larger jumps.
Yeah, I don't see that would be a problem. I think, like Ann suggested, it would be pretty simple to do if you call around and keep your finger on the pulse of the comparables. And what questions aren't we asking that we should? What things aren't we considering?
Actually, you're asking very good questions for this. I think, asking about, even though we didn't do a benefit study, when we did do it, you were fairly consistent with the market. But that doesn't mean you can still look at benefits, You know, sometimes employees will say, you know, I wish the city was picking up a little bit more of my health insurance premium, and I would maybe forego a little bit of an increase in wages if the city was doing that. So even though it wasn't included this time, it's still a conversation that the city council and the city staff can have about what is important to them. Is it wages? Is it benefits? Is it a combination of the two? And just getting that type of feedback.
Okay, thank you. Did you have anything else, Don?
No, I just think that we should send it over to Personnel Committee and you can
Mhm.
digest it a little bit, come back with some more ideas and we can talk about it a little more.
Okay. Everybody agree?
Yeah.
That's a good idea, yeah. And if anyone has questions, they can always ask, come in and sit down with Jenny. Employees have questions, ask Jenny. If you have suggestions, get them to Jenny and you know, nothing, I mean, put it all out there. Let's see what we end up with. So that's the key. So.
And really, time frame wise, we're really looking budget time, so I mean, that's.
Yeah, we'll have to do some meetings and sit down and discuss it, the three of it in the next, you know.
Well, I think we should. have-
Next couple months, it's coming up, so.
Yeah, it's gonna have to be.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be one meeting. So, okay.
Yeah, it happens faster than you think.
Is there anything else that any of the employees, any of the people in the audience here wanted to bring up? Go ahead, Brian.
I would just like to mention that I do like the idea of evaluating it every 2 years, because 5 years ago, the city wanted to make sure they were paying us fairly, and they had a target of being in the middle, and now we look 5 years later, and we're 5 to 6% behind. So if we did it every couple of years, we wouldn't be coming in that situation where all of a sudden the city has to look and adjust their budget the following year at $80,000 to $100,000. If we did it every 2 years, it would, I think, alleviate a lot of problems.
Thank you. Okay. If I don't see any further questions or nobody has, we can entertain a motion to adjourn.
You have it.
I'll second it.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
Thank you.
My pleasure, and just contact me if any other questions arise.
Will do. Thank you. Have a great night.
All right, thanks, you too.
Hey, Craig, can you see if the guys can hang in for a minute? They don't mind.
I'm really happy.